And first of all, I just want to thank Sinn Féin and in particular Deputy Tully for this important and timely motion. The Social Democrats fully support it. Count Gordon, it's another week, another motion on the disgraceful state of our disability services. Another reminder that life is harder, life's more stressful and life's more expensive when you have a disability in Ireland. Today's motion highlights the unmet need in terms of respite care, with particular reference to the lack of respite beds in Cork. Last week we discussed the 10,696 children who've been waiting for over 12 months for initial contact with the Children's Disability Network team. 2 weeks before that, a motion on the utter failure of this and previous governments to replace the mobility allowance and motorised transport grant since it was discounted for new applications in 2013. There are common trends here: the disregard for people with disabilities, an uncoordinated and antiquated approach to understanding disability, not to mention the government has been busy infighting and kite-flying proposed tax cuts at a time when our disability and health services are shockingly understaffed. How many more opposition motions do we need? How many more disabled people have to come forward and tell their story? How many more parents will have to save and to sacrifice to afford private services that should be provided by the HSE? If you live with a disability in Ireland, there is significantly greater risk than non-disabled people of experiencing poverty, social exclusion and unemployment. We have the highest in the EU in unemployment, as well as barriers in transport, housing and education. But another way is possible. Week after week in the Disability Matters Committee, we examine the importance of a rights-based approach. We also see how children and adults are denied their rights to education, to healthcare, to live independently and to work. The government will claim that it's committed to a rights-based model, but this is evidently untrue. One of the most concrete actions that the government could take if they were willing is to ratify the optional protocol of the Convention of the Rights of People with Disabilities. This mechanism allows individuals and groups to hold the state to account for failures to uphold their rights by making complaints directly to the UN Committee for the Rights of People with Disabilities. We're the only country who didn't do that. I've consistently and repeatedly asked the Minister to show he is committed to a rights-based approach by ratifying the optional protocol. Not only does the government keep refusing to do it, but it keeps just shifting the goalposts on the reasons why it can't. For ages it was the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act. Now that's done, what's the next excuse? Keeps changing. The Social Democrats are fully committed to ratifying the optional protocol and guaranteeing the rights through the introduction of statutory right to home care and personal assistance, and commence in full the Education for Persons with Special Education Needs Act 2004, also known as the EPSON Act, and the Irish Sign Language Act 2017. These are all actions that the government can and should take and can blatantly afford to take at this time. Respite is an essential part of disability services, yet it's clear that there are very few respite beds and community services. Talking with families, one of the issues they often bring up is the lack of respite services both for children and adults with disabilities. So many people in my constituency haven't had any respite care at all since before the pandemic. For example, in Cork, there are supposed to be 27 beds for overnight respite services for children under 18 years of age with an intellectual disability, physical disability or autism. However, 10 of the beds, in the words of the HSE, are, quote, suppressed or suspended due to staffing shortages. So almost 40% of the respite beds for children and young people in Cork just aren't available. The numbers are marginally better for adults, with 6 of 39 beds closed, also due to staff shortages, and 1 bed is weekends only. The total number on paper was already insufficient. Then the numbers of available beds in reality is shockingly low. This drastically reduces the chances of families being able to access respite. It's leaving overstretched and already exhausted families without basic services. There has also been a gradual increase in the number of agency staff in this area, and that's only a stopgap measure that fails to address the much larger systemic issue of staff in disability services. When we're discussing respite services, it's important to understand how important they are for disabled people and their families and carers. Research has consistently shown that it improves well-being. Respite is about giving everyone a break, giving the individual and families some space. This allows everybody a chance to rest and to recharge. We all know the incredible stresses faced by families with either children or adults with disabilities. Nobody can live under that pressure without it affecting their mental and physical health. Families and carers need respite. A report from the National Disability Authority explained that respite is an opportunity for disabled people to increase their independence, socialise with other people and experience new and different activities. This report, based on participation from people with disabilities, showed high levels of satisfaction with many aspects of respite services, especially the chance to get some time for themselves, some time away from their family, and to engage in interesting and meaningful activities. Also, the participants noted respite gave their family members, their carers, in particular their mothers, a break. Respite is an essential service. This has to be recognised by the government. There is a pressing need for a drastic increase in our respite capacity. In our alternative budget, the Social Democrats propose moving towards an annual entitlement of 20 days respite for disabled people and carers. This was part of the broader reforms needed to support family carers. It's including increasing the rate of carers allowance by €25 per week. Instead, the government increased it by 12. We also had provision for a cost of disability payment that wasn't a one-off one, that acknowledged disability is every day of the year. Respite needs to be treated as a vital service for disabled people and their families, and until the government appreciates its importance and the many benefits, thousands of families will continue to be denied it. I've pointed out that respite capacity in Cork is especially poor. Service providers are overstretched and under-resourced. I think we all know that. But in response to a parliamentary question, the HSE have informed me that the new development funding strategy under the National Service Plan, which provides for the 2023 Cork Kerry Community Healthcare Disability Services, will mean that the funding available for expansion of respite services to CHO4 is less than 50% of the usual annual development funding allocation for CHO4 for respite services, and contains no funding for residential respite. So any prospect to improve services in Cork will presumably be impacted by this. This is unbelievable. There's also the ongoing impact of proposed closure of the Onakura mental health facility in Middleton and the failure to set up a development team to establish a new 10-person mental health unit. Then there are the issues of the children in Carrigaline Special School who can't access overnight respite services. This is down to a complete lack of connected and child-centred services. The school is under patronage of the Cork ETB, and the students are assigned to Children's Disability Networks teams run by service providers, but they do not have access to respite offered by the same service providers. Minister, I think just finally, worst of all, is that all of these things, a lot of stuff that we talk about is around children's access to things like the network teams, things like speech and language, physiotherapy, places in special classes, ASD classes, special schools that are non-existent in many of our constituencies. But then actually after that, when you become an adult and you're a disabled person in Ireland, then you've got absolutely nothing. You're not even fighting for a place in a particular place. There's no provision in housing plans to build houses that are adapted for independent supported living. We saw the massive fallout of that in West Cork recently when Coaction had to use were potentially going to use a purpose-built building for children's day services to accommodate adults. The whole thing is a complete disaster. And I have to say, having worked abroad for many years in disability support services, to see how good services can be and the very profound impact that that can have on people's lives, and the individuals and their families, the difference between learning how to be able to communicate or not, how to be able to move yourself around independently, be it in a wheelchair or whatever way it might be. That is the difference, and it can be done. It can be done so much better that I honestly couldn't believe when I came back to Ireland years later, got into politics, to realise how desperate the services are here compared to other countries. And the country I worked in is Malta. You could draw a lot of similarities between here and there. There is no reason why we can't do it. We have the money, we need the political will, and we need a connected approach, and we need a rights-based approach to disability in this country.